Good morning, ma'am. I would like to thanks to organize for their kind invitations towards me, enabling me to participate in this wonderful forms. Myself Shubham. Today I am here to present about the very fascinated seminar topic is welding. Next slide is introductions. It is a fabrication department of the simplex or department of productions. Internal plannings for the sequence of manufacturing of the job. Now the welding is the most rapid and the easiest way of the fabrications and assembly of metal parts. The filler material has a melting point approximately the same as the base metal. Next slide is the contents. Now these are the contents are. The next slide is welding. The welding is the process of joining two or more similar or dissimilar metals by heating them to a suitable temperature, with or without the applications of pressures, filler materials and flux. Mostly welding is used for making a permanent joints. Welding is the most rapid and the easiest way of fabrications and the assembly of the metal parts. The next slide is the types of welding. Mainly there are the two types of the welding. Firstly, I am explaining plastic welding. It is known as the pressure welding. The piece of metals to be joined are heated to a plastic states and forced together by an external pressure. Like an example is the resistance welding. Now the next is the fusion welding. It is also known as the non-pressure welding process, and the material at the joint is heated to a molten state and allowed to solidify. Example, gas welding and the arc welding. The next slide is the classification of welding process. These are the classification of the welding process is the firstly explaining a gas welding. It is also known as the oxyacetylene welding. Next is arc welding, resistance welding, solid state welding, the thermochemical welding, and the last is the low temperature welding. Next slide is a gas welding. Firstly, I am explaining about the gas welding. A gas welding is a fusion welding process in which the heat for welding is obtained by the combustion of the oxygen and fuel. The gas may be acetylene, hydrogen or propane. These are the types of the gas welding are oxyacetylene, air acetylene, oxyhydrogen and the oxy fuel. So these are the types of the gas welding are. The next slide is oxyacetylene welding. According to this figure, oxyacetylene welding is the combination of oxygens and acetylene is used in correct proportion to produce an intense gas flame. The process is known as the oxyacetylene welding. So now the next slide is the gas welding equipments. These all are called the gas welding equipments. Firstly, explaining a gas welding pressures. In a gas welding pressures, the oxygen is 125 kg per centimeter square. The value of the acetylene is 16 kg per centimeter square. Second is the regulators. In the sense, working pressure of oxygen 1 kg per centimeter square and the working pressure of acetylene is 0.15 kg per centimeter square. Now the working pressure varies depends upon the thickness of the workpiece welded. The third is the pressure gauges. And the next is the hoses. Next is the welding torch. Now the check valve, and the last is the non-return valve. So these are the welding equipments, and this is mostly important in welding process. Next slide is the advantage and disadvantage of the welding. So firstly explaining the advantage of the welding. Okay, so first is the portable and the most versatile process. Second is the better control over the temperature. Next is the suitable to weld dissimilar matter. The last is the low cost and the maintenance. Now the second is the disadvantage. Disadvantage, the first is not suitable for the heavy sections, less working temperature of the gas flame, and the last is the slow rate of heating. Next slide is the arc welding. Arc welding is a fusion welding process in which the heat required to fuse the material is obtained from the electric arc between the base metal and an electrode. These are the types of the arc welding. Firstly, I am explaining a metal arc welding, submerged arc welding, tungsten inert gas welding, and the last is the metal inert gas welding. The next slide is the equipments. A welding generator DC or transformer AC. Firstly, these equipments are the very important in the welding process. So welding generator in DC and the transformer AC. The next is the two cables are used, one for work and one for the electrode. The next is the electrode holder. It is most important part for the welding. It can hold the electrode. The next is the electrode. Now the protective shield. The next is the gloves, and the next is the wire brush. Now the next is chipping hammer, and the last is the goggles. Goggle is the most important part when we started in the welding process, because goggles can protect your eyes from a high range of heat. So that things are the very important in the welding process, and these are called the equipments of the welding. Now the next slide is the metal arc welding. According to this figure, in metal arc welding, the electric arc to coalesce metals. Arc welding is the most common method of welding metals. The electricity travels from electrode to the base metal to the ground. According to this figure, it can be defined and shown. Now the next slide is the advantage and the disadvantage of arc welding. Firstly, I am explaining the advantage. The most efficient way to join metals. Next is the lowest cost joining method. Next is afford lighter weight through better utilizations of materials. The next is the joins all commercial metals. The next is the provide design flexibility. Now the second thing is disadvantage. Manually applied, therefore high labor cost. Second is the need high energy, causing danger. Third is not convenient for de-assembly. The next slide is the applications. It is used in the manufacture of the automobile bodies, aircraft frames, railway wagons, machine frames, structural works, tanks, furniture, boilers, general repair works, and shipbuilding, etc. So these are the application of the welding. Now the next slide is the conclusion. In this we learn about the most popular welding type uses in industries. Firstly, explaining a good weld is always strong. General welding equipment is not very costly. The third is the portable welding equipments are available. Fourth is a large number of metals and alloy by both similar and dissimilar can be joined by welding. Thank you so much, ma'am.